Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to EqualityHi's very first event for the Pride Month of June. We have a total of 7, which will be happening every Wednesday and Friday afternoons during Pauhana between 5 and 6. It'll be here on Zoom and also live on our Facebook page and the event page that we have. So let your friends know about us, and we hope you enjoy today's event. And EqualityHi presents Pride Talks 2020. The topic today is called Hula Perspective on Gender and Sexuality. First of all, I want to say that EqualityHi's mission is EqualityHi's mission envisions a thriving and empowering culture that proactively engages in creating an inclusive and diverse queer community through aloha, leadership, resources, services, and education. You can visit us on Facebook, Instagram, or on our website, www.equalityhi.org. I would also like to thank our co-sponsors, Full Life. Full Life empowers people with disabilities to live full, empowered lives. And also Able to Hawaii Artists. Able to Hawaii Artists celebrates the diverse abilities as well as promote entrepreneurship in the arts. And they have an annual event happening on October 10th this year at the Prince Kuhio Plaza from 10 to 3. So before we move on, I would like to introduce Ray Saladares, our treasurer, who would like to provide us with some guidance, audience guidance. Ray?
Sure, thanks, Mar. This is Ray Saladares again, and I'm the treasurer for EqualityHi. And I just want to give some quick housekeeping audience guidelines. First of all, in regards to questions, if anyone has any questions, they will be selected based on relevance to the topic and time constraints. So for those who are using Zoom, you can type in your question in the chat box, and either myself or Mar will be able to see that. If you are live streaming on Facebook, please go ahead and comment in the comment section, and we'll go ahead and try to get those questions answered for you. Secondly, this is a public event and will be filmed, so your participation in this event constitutes express permission and consent for EqualityHi unlimited use of this event footage in whole or in part. Third, as at the moderator's discretion, any use of disrespectful language, gestures, or actions by any attendees will result in removal from this event and may include any future events as well. And then lastly, just as a disclaimer that all statements and opinions expressed by our guests, members of the audience do not necessarily reflect the views of EqualityHi or its members. All right, so I'm going to throw this back over to Mar so we can introduce our guest speakers.
All right, thank you, Ray. Let's see here, let me go ahead and spotlight this screen while I talk and provide introductions to our guests. We have 2 guests this afternoon. The first one is Kumu Manai Kalua Kalua, who is the Kumu for Halau Akaunu, and he's probably going to pronounce that better than I can when we have him speak. Born and raised in Keaukaha, Hilo, Hawaii, Manaiakalani Kalua is a Kumu Hula based in Hilo. His Halau Akaunu is rooted in the traditions of Halau o Kekuhi and UNUKUPUKUPU. Manaiakalani is also a graduate of Haka Ula o elikōlani College, Hawaiian language, University of Hawaii in Hilo, and he currently works as a resource consultant in Hawaiian-based education. So what I'd like to do is have Manai, I'm gonna spotlight his video, and then that way he can just say hello to everyone, and then we're gonna introduce our next guest. Go ahead, Manai.
Aloha, everyone.
All right, thank you. And then our next guest is Kumu Ryan McCormack of Halau Māunuunu. He is a Kumu, Hula, and an educator living in Puna, Hawaii. Kumu Ryan lectures on courses in Hawaii mythology and history of Hawaiʻi Community College. Oh, and history at Hawaiʻi Community College. Additionally, his Halau Māunuunu perpetuates the teachings of the Hula Pele in the lineage of UNUKUPUKUPU. He is deeply interested in the role of myth in maintaining the vital connections between people and place. So I'm gonna spotlight Ryan's video, and you wanna say hello to everyone?
Aloha kako. Hi, everybody.
All right. So let's just get started. And so the topic is Hula perspective on gender and sexuality. And because this is a true form of talk story, it's just going to flow very casually, and I'll do my best to try and spotlight whoever is speaking. So if one of you would like to speak, just let us know, and I'll try and spotlight you as quickly as I can. Otherwise, if I'm not able to provide a spotlight on who's talking, we're going to see this. All right, you guys ready? Who would like to start first?
Ryan can start.
No, Manai, you my older brother. You can go.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So I guess part of what we were, me and Ryan were discussing in lieu of this particular discussion on gender and sexuality through Hula. Well, Hula and myth. So some background things. The traditions that myself and Ryan come from, our Hula traditions, are rooted in this particular island's landscape. So the basis of how we do what we do in Hula, because a lot of Hula traditions will be slightly different depending on origin. So because ours comes out of the volcanic landscape that most of us had experienced 2 years ago, that really highly affects the way that we do things and how we look and interact with our environment. So with that said, how does gender and sexuality tie into our landscape and through our Hula practices? So for us, one of the main things that happens in our traditions is that there's a lot of gender neutrality when it comes to Hula and when it comes to chant. It's not explicitly gender neutral, but for a lot of the times when you're doing the dance, the energy of the dance or the gender to some extent of the dancer or the chant needs to be embodied by the dancer regardless of the gender of the dancer. So that's kind of a big thing for us, which is slightly different because I know that in a lot of other, and I cannot talk on behalf of other Hula traditions, but from what I know of other Hula traditions, it's a lot of it is gender specific. So some examples are that if you've seen people dance with a pa'u or a hula skirt, for us, the men and the women both wear. In a lot of other halau, only women will wear a pa'u and men don't. So, I mean, that's one physical thing that you can see that's notably different between us or our traditions and a lot of other ones. And it's simply because when it comes to the dance and the text of the dance, the text determines the gender or the text determines what needs to be embodied. And for us, because we also look at each of us as individuals as, components of both male and female energy, you kind of just have to adjust how you tap into that when you have to express, I guess, through either voice or movement. Okay, tag Ryan.
Okay, mahalo. Yeah, so we're going to be kind of biased today because Manai and I come from the same lineage. So we certainly don't speak on behalf of all hula practitioners, or even in our own respective practices, there's an ongoing evolution, because these practices and these myths are very much alive. And so we may have our own takes on certain things, but we definitely come from a particular landscape, like Manai said, that has to do with the volcano and a lot of myths that happens to be feminine in origin. And my experience of this landscape, first of all, let me say I'm a malihini to this place. I'm born and raised in Waimanalo on Oahu in Ko'olaupoko. I came here about 13 years ago, or almost 13 years ago, specifically to learn this style of hula, of this landscape. And my ancestors haven't been in Hawaii nearly as long as Manais have. On my mom's side, I'm the fourth generation in Hawaii, Okinawan, and my dad's side is Irish American. I'm the third generation here. So my story here is really short. So I don't speak on behalf of Kanaka Maoli, because I'm not. I don't speak on behalf of all hula people, like we already said. So I can really only share my experience, and my experience, and much of it was alongside Manai as well, was a very inclusive one. And we'll talk a little more about that, but that somehow having everything framed in the Pele mythology and the respective mythology of this landscape, for me, made a big space for all the parts of me to suddenly come to the table in our practice. And when I was talking about the neutrality of our practice, specifically that kane and wahine, and however you identify, we all dance together. For the most part, we dance the same choreography. But that's not to say that there isn't a deep idea of duality, at the core of some mythology, and even within the Pele cycle, there's definitely an idea of dualism. But in hula, on some level, to me, our job is to encompass, and to transcend and integrate that dualism. And so that's where that neutrality also comes in for me, that it goes beyond your gender. That's just one level of your identity. But inside of each of us, regardless of our gender identity, there are these dual energies that through our movement, through the vibrations of our practice, and through the ritual framework, we try to seek a balance of. And I think that's what we'll talk a little bit more about today. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but yeah, that's my story. Right now I live in Puna, and we practice our hula here, right here in Kilauea, where the mythology of Pele and Hi'iaka is very much a reality, not so much a metaphor. But back to you, Manai.
Oh, if at any point you guys have questions, just kind of hit up on the, I think we can get notifications on the chat thing.
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So just tap them in so that somebody knows to pay attention. Okay, so let's kind of look at some other things dealing with, well, I guess we'll stick with gender for now, and then we can go to a little bit more into the sexuality of how that ties in a little later.
Sure.
So we also have, like Ryan said, we're sort of it's a different breed. So we're one of the few traditions, I would say, that has men and women not separated to dance hula. A lot of times you'll see in like open enrollment invitations, they'll have like a vahine class or a women's class, and then they'll have a men's class separate. And then maybe you practice together for certain things. But and like Ryan said, the choreography will be a lot more different for men and women in most other halau. In ours, there's very few dances, like I could practically count the dances that we have slightly variant between what the men are doing and what the women are doing. Basically, we're doing the same dance all the way through. There's not really much adjustments. If you're a male, you're doing this. If you're a female, you're doing that. Although we do have some dances that will kind of go a little bit more gender specific in that case. And then since we're talking choreography, so part of our choreography is also looking at least how we do it. And when I say we, I mean like me, my voices, some of the other people in my tradition. But when we choreograph, we're also looking at that same balance between masculine and feminine energies. So something else that you may want to, I guess, be aware of while we're talking about this, you know, masculine feminine balance is that our bodies, in the understanding of the Hawaiian, our bodies are both. So there's like half hemispheres on our body, multiples of them that look more towards masculine and feminine energy. So one of the most common that a lot of people would either know or be familiar with is the right side of our body and the left side of our body. So our right side is considered masculine and our left side is considered feminine. So even outside of hula, that consciousness is taken into consideration. So like in La'au Lapa'au, when you're doing healing medicine, if it's considered a masculine illness, which basically means it's something that's outward that you can see, or if it's dealing with masculine energy in what you're trying to cleanse, then you'd be doing everything with your right hand. So like when you have to pick the la'au, you'll pick it with your right hand as opposed to your left. But then if it's for a female, then you're picking with your left, not your right. So even in that, so like our hula bodies are sort of built that way. Well, not built, but we choreograph that way with those things in mind. Another half of our hemispheres is our torso up area, and then below. So basically that mark is either, well, basically it's your pico, your belly button. Like that's the cutoff. So it's like belly button up, male, belly button down, female. So a lot of times when we look at choreography, what your feet are doing, even though they may look masculine, that's looking at feminine energy more than it is male energy. And then our hands, which is what a lot of people will then think is feminine, right? Because they're like, you have to have pretty soft hands or you need to do this. A lot of that, it has to do with masculine communication. And then if you're cutting our body the other way, half front and back, front would be female, back would be male. So it's kind of stuff like that. That's all just kind of lumped together that we're, I don't want to say multifaceted thinking, but I mean like it's multidimensional thinking, so that we're conscious of all of those things. So when you're doing a motion, you're not just arbitrarily throwing out motions. You're like, oh, hey, this is a flower. Well, maybe the flower is not going to be on the right. It has to be on the left. Maybe it's not going to be all the way up in the sky. It needs to be a little bit lower to the ground, something like that. Dependent on the context of what you're trying to express. I guess if that makes sense. Okay, go Ryan. I was talking planning.
No, that's great. That's everything. We can go home now. Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest comparison I can kind of make in other spiritual ritual systems is it's sort of Taoist. You know, there's a yin and there's a yang, and so when we're looking at gender, we're looking more at energies. I think what you can talk a little bit more about the politics of body and how that relates to today. But going back to what I said earlier, that my experience of hula on this island was one that was very inclusive because it had to do with all of us finding balance of those energies inside of us, and that had nothing to do with our gender or our sexuality. That was just part of the alchemy that is at the core of the practice. And to me, it kind of goes back to the idea that hula is an extension of the natural environment. And in our tradition, part of the beginnings of our style of dancing comes from Hi'iaka, and we'll talk a little bit more about her in a little bit, I'm sure. But Hi'iaka mimicking the movements of the environment, the wind through the trees, yeah, and the waves in the shore. And so our whole practice really comes from the environment. And so one of the things that Auntie Nalani Kanakaole taught me in class at Hawaiʻi Community College was that different elements have gender. So a wind that enters into a forest has a masculine nature, not male per se, but masculine in its function that it enters into. And the forest that receives that becomes feminine in that poetic moment, not female, but feminine. In the same way that light can penetrate into a landscape and be a masculine form, and rain can penetrate into the earth as a masculine form, and the receiving earth is the feminine. So because elements have masculine and feminine, and because we are made up of the elements, or if we want to think about it in a ko'ihonua, a cosmological sense, we descend from the elements, then they're inside of us, you know? And I work a lot with psychology, and that's the same idea with psychology, is that we got a little bit of mom and a little bit of dad inside of us, whether we like it or not. And that has little to do with your gender, perhaps. So the kind of work that we do, it's not that gender doesn't exist, it's just that we don't have hangups around it. We all have that similar journey to do inside of us, which is to go in and balance those energies out, right? And we see that in the elemental environment. And then we see that in different applications of hula across time. Now, so at certain periods and in certain places, again, hula is different all over the place, right? So we cannot speak about hula and put our finger at one place at one time. But in sometimes hula was a male practice, you know, and was used to help balance energies of men or warriors that might otherwise, you know, sway too far to the masculine. And hula was used to engender that implicit femininity to balance the spirit. And we have examples in our mythology of great and powerful chiefs who are also able to dance hula, and that was seen as something that was good, you know, and attractive about that person to be able to master both realms. So today there is a different gender perspective around hula, and maybe we'll get to talk about that, I'm not sure. But as hula has moved across the historical timeline, it has evolved. And as Hawaii has encountered the Western world, those ideas of gender have come in, and colonization has certainly had its effect. And so the hula that we see today, and the way people receive hula today is the result of a lot of historical change. But what we're talking about today, Manai and I, is sort of the ritual side of things, how it's been handed down to us from our teachers and their teachers and their teachers as a healing process, as a way to balance these gendered energies. So anyway, Manai.
See oh shucks, I did something. I don't see a question yet.
Yeah. What's going on?
Okay, so I guess we're good then. If we're moving too fast, just kind of slow us down and be like, hold it up, pump your brakes, something. Okay, so we're gonna, I kind of want to dive into the mo'olelo part, or the ka'au part, mythology, behind our practice.
Sure.
Please do.
Because you can see a lot of, I think you can see a lot of where the gender and the sexuality and the intimacy of relationships kind of plays a part.
Yeah.
In why we do how we do, the way we do. So if you're not familiar with the Pele and Hi'iaka story, I'll give you like a really quick, as fast as I can do it, Cliff Notes version. So ultimately, Pele is she's a female deity. She's basically magma, and the energy of creation. So like giving birth to new land, procreation, stuff like that. And so she goes through her own journey. I mean, because most people will hear Pele and Hi'iaka synonymously because that's kind of the story that most people will know, which is actually more Hi'iaka's story than it is Pele's, as far as maturation and growing up and coming into her being and figuring out herself. But in Pele's journey, when she comes to Hawaii, part of that process for Pele as well as Hi'iaka was also to look at balance. They were both so Pele needs to leave Kahiki to come over here because of various reasons, dependent on the version of the story you're reading. So we'll go for the family drama version. Basically, she sets Kahiki on fire while she's practicing, she's practicing her eruptions and she's trying to get a hang of it. And she's a little overzealous, so she basically burns everything down. She covers the whole island or the whole space in magma, desolate. It's now desolated, and her older sister is like, you gotta go. Like, you cannot function over here. We cannot deal with you being the way you are. So you need to go and find your space. So part of Pele's journey to find her space, which for us ends up here on this island, a little sub part of that journey was also to look at Pele finding or reconnecting with her father. So Pele is magma, right? Lava that creates land, which is what we saw 2 years ago. And then her mother is Haumea, which is the earth itself and the magma chamber, like the inner core, outer core, all that underground magma, big burning stuff. So that's the mother. And then her father is the sun, Kanehualani. So Pele is, she pulls a lot genetically from the two elements that created her, if that makes sense. And so Pele basically, in this journey, after she sets Kahiki ablaze and she's trying to find a new home, is also in a search for her father, the sun. So in her migration, she's following the path of the sun because she's trying to reconnect with that. So part of that understanding for us is that she's reconnecting to her masculine energy to kind of, balance out her naturally masculine ways and figure out where that's going to sit perfectly for her so that she can do what she does without becoming overzealous and taking it beyond overboard. That was kind of one. And then in Hi'iaka's journey, which is later after Pele establishes herself here, Hi'iaka's journey is to go and fetch the lover of Pele, Lohi'au, from Kauai, and bring him back. And that becomes part of her maturation journey. But the male essence, because Hi'iaka is very feminine in a lot of her ideals, and she's basically in her maturation on this journey to go find Lohi'au, she's utilizing her feminine qualities, is the best way I can say it, feminine qualities to try and she needs to find that male balance, which is Lohi'au. So in her finding this lover for her sister, she's reconnecting with all of those other things that are going to help her feminine qualities kind of work or function a little bit more balanced, if that makes sense. Okay, Ryan, you want to tag? Ryan, you stay muted.
Hi, how about now? Can you hear
Perfect.
me? Okay, all right, mahalo, sorry. Great, yeah, so, I think I just want to preface by saying when we talk about ka'au, we talk about myth, on some level, we're talking about history, we're talking about events and and ancestors. And we're also talking about images of individuals that have such large symbolic potential because of the size of and the import of their story, that some people have genealogical connection to them, but all of us can imagine an archetypal connection to these particular images. So my genealogy doesn't go back to Pele and Hi'iaka the way Manai's does, but in our practice, I still invite, I explore how those images relate and those particular ancestors of some people relate to me. So that is to say, when we talk about things in mythic terms, what's happening on the outside is always being mirrored by an inner process. So everything Hi'iaka encounters on her journey is also indicative of inner changes and transformations and balances. So that's what Manai is talking about in terms of both Pele and Hi'iaka's journey. They are feminine, but their journey entails a coming to terms with the masculine aspects of their being. But that's ritualized and that is initiated in a journey towards a literal masculine figure outside of them. So in Pele's story, it was her father, and that's very typical. We have, you know, there's a lot of stories about, there's a lot of myth about relationship with the father image and how a person, regardless of their gender, comes to terms with that in their life. And then in Hi'iaka's, it's lohi'au, it's the lover, and how love and desire is central to that tale. It's very interesting and how it can also alchemize the masculine and the feminine inside. So there's a question in the chat that asks about what, you know, is it always so divided, masculine and feminine, up and down, you know, and I just want to clarify that there's a nuance of difference between, for me at least, I can only speak for myself, between duality and polarity, you know, or bifurcation. Just as much as there's, you know, there's black and there's white and there's all kinds of shades of gray in between. So to me, to indicate ends of a spectrum is just that. It's just to say that masculine and feminine are bookends, so to speak, but there's a whole ocean in between that courses. And at Hula, we're really sort of seeking where those spaces come together, what we call those liminal spaces, because something happens at the conjecture of, when the masculine and the feminine come together, not only in terms of physical sex, but in terms of psyche, in terms of relationality, in terms of elements. When masculine and feminine elements come together, there gets creation and it gets life. And that's what we're really, at least to me, what we're seeking in the Hula is to come to those liminal spaces. And there's lots of liminal spaces in our environment. And those spaces are often the places that are infused with myth. But the liminal spaces are also the spaces that we seek to get into with ritual, where the conscious and the unconscious become open up. And sort of the line between the two blur. To me, that's part of why we drink ava in our ritual, is to get to that liminal space. Another one of the liminal spaces that we work with heavily in Hula is the dream space. So a lot of our choreography and ideas are transceived through dreams as much as they are through genealogy. Dreaming is one of those liminal spaces between conscious and unconscious, where, you know, the channels between the two are kind of opened up. In fact, the story of Hi'iaka in one version begins with Pele dreaming, and that's how she meets Lohi'au. She sleeps and she gets into this liminal space drawn by the sound of music. We don't need to get into that right now, but she's drawn into that liminality between masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, and it encounters love in her spirit form. You know, and that's where she meets Lohi'au, and then Hi'iaka is sent to go get Lohi'au, but it begins with a dream. So to answer the question, and I'm not sure if this does, I hope it does, is that there are masculine and feminine realms, but just, you know, again, not to overly compare, but when we look at the yin and the yang symbol in Taoism, there's a bit of the yin in the yang and vice versa. They're not mutually exclusive. But when you look at the mele, and certainly when you look at this myth, there's an east and there's a west. You know, there's a day and there's a night. There's an outer, there's an inner. There's an up and there's a down, right? And we know Pele is this movement from the inside up, and towards the end of the story, Hi'iaka buries down and in. So even Pele and Hi'iaka, to me, even though they're both female deities, they represent a particular duality, where Pele is certainly the more assertive, at least at first. She sends Hi'iaka on this journey. And Hi'iaka, up into a point, is the more obsequious and passive and permissive, and always says, yes, sure, whatever you want, I'll do it. And the part of the apotheosis, the deification of Hi'iaka, this moment where she steps into a greater balance and a greater functioning, is when she actually integrates a more assertive position, not surrendering her femininity, meaning her predilection for healing and compassion, but actually by standing into her story. I'll just say one more thing and I'll hand it back to Manai, which is one of the images I really ruminate on, and this mythology is really my core, but I like to study other mythologies, especially through the lens of archetypal psychology. But this image of Pele with her o'o, her divining rod, her stick. It's the same stick that the farmer uses to penetrate and open up the earth. But this is what she uses to open up craters. Yeah, and Manai talked about her journey to Hawaii, and all over the place there are craters that we say Pele opened up. And eventually she used this o'o to open up Kilauea, you know, which in most versions is her final resting spot. The o'o's name is Paoa, and we'll talk about that later because he's actually a male figure that shows up in the myth. But the idea of a woman that holds her own phallus, I love that, you know? I mean, what? And Pele has a lot of different trysts and romances in her stories, but most of the ones I know end up with her really by herself ultimately. And it's almost as if as a female, as an aqua, though female, she has integrated her own masculinity, or as we would say in Jungian terms, her own animus. You know, she's sort of an animus woman. She has her own assertiveness intact. So, and that sheds a little bit of an interesting light to me into the kind of gendered world that those of us in the Pele tradition inhabit, that we stem from a genealogy and from a landscape that is of a female that already has her own inherent masculinity. And how does that just short circuit all of our assumptions of gender via a patriarchal model, you know? So come live on the slope of a volcano and slowly but surely your assumptions about gendered environment might slip away. Anyway, Manai.
Okay, I hope that answered. That was a really good answer, I think, for Beverly's question. I think part of it too is that even though I talked about those different hemispheres as being masculine and feminine and, you know, male or female gender, a lot of it has to do with, like Ryan said, balance. And it's looking at the synergy of those two energies that makes Hula that magical thing that you see. Because if one is overpowering the other one, and there's no balance or harmony within the choreography and how we utilize all of those spaces or portions of our body, if we don't use them correctly, it doesn't, if it's heavily one thing and not the other, you tend to really lose a lot or overcomplicate it, as far as I see it. So, but that's just the world according to Manai. You guys gonna get plenty of that today, the world according to Manai. So I just saw, I know we have a couple of questions coming in, so that's good. So there was another question that I have an answer to. Let me find it. Oh, here. So Asmahu has always been a part of the Hawaiian culture. Has it ever been expressed in the past through Oli or Hula Kahiko? And if so, can we name a few? So actually, even within our traditions, the role of the mahu. So we have, I mean, we have references in stories about like the Pai Mahu, which were a group of men that were mahu, who came into this particular Hawaii landscape and actually brought healing and medicine and a whole bunch of other stuff. Like they're kind of fabulous. And they had all these powers and stuff. So, I mean, that's in that. For hula, the term that comes out that actually shows the most, or that there's a word that shows up in some of our chants, specifically in the Pele and Hi'iaka chants. The word is aikane. And so aikane talks about, specifically, it's a same gendered relationship. So like my aikane would have to be biologically male. A female's aikane would have to be a female. And cannot be like if your best friend is a girl, she cannot be an aikane if you're a guy. And vice versa. It just doesn't work that way. But that particular relationship shows up in Mo'olelo and in some of our chants to talk about the relationship of those two people. And so basically the aikane is the closest relationship that you could possibly have without having to be like spouses, basically. That's what it is. It's like your bestie that does everything with you. You're connected at the hip. You can finish each other's thoughts. You've basically done everything and anything together. And because of that intimacy, sometimes it's become sexual. So aikane does not necessarily have to refer to a same gendered sexual relationship. It doesn't have to be. But a lot of times it has turned into, or it can be seen or alluded to in a lot of our chants and our stories, to it being a lot more intimate than just best friends. So in what we were talking about for the Pele and Hi'iaka story, Hi'iaka actually has a couple of them, which is sort of rare because you don't normally have tons of aikane because it's a very close personal friendship. And a lot of time we have so many gradations of relationships and friendships in Hawaiian or in Hawaii that the aikane was kind of is sort of a special place to have. And so Hi'iaka kind of lucked out because she has a bunch that they refer to each other in our mo'olelo and in our chants as aikane. One of my favorite examples of that is when Hi'iaka is leaving to go and fetch Lohi'au. Her aikane, Hopoi, who is kind of the impetus to why we have our traditions. Hopoi is she's sort of the big pusher to get Hi'iaka to begin the hula traditions that we practice. That's part of our origin story. But Hopoi and Hi'iaka are aikane. Their relationship and their references to each other is always aikane. Ku'u aikane. Or my dearest, bestest friend, however you want to say it. I don't have a good way to say it in English. But there's this one chant when Hi'iaka is getting ready to leave, Ku'u aikane kekai ho'eu maloko, which she uses the landscape of Puna, basically from Apua, which is at the boundary between Puna and Ka'u, until you get to like, I don't know how far she goes. She gets to like Kaimu and stuff. So it's kind of far, but she talks about a lot of places in between, Panau Nui, Panau Iki, Kalapana, Kaimu, that surf that she talks about, ku'e kane ke kai ho'eu maloko. Ho'eu is a surf that was reserved, you know, for people in Kaimu. So that was the one that that the regular peoples could go on. So like not the akuas, because the akuas had their own. And so you'll have chants like that. Lohi'au uses that for a couple of his iconic. Pa'ua was one of them. The one that has the same name as Pele's O'o. He does another one where he talks to his other iconic, Kane Milohai, in another version of the Pele and Hi'iaka story. He refers to Kane Milohai as his iconic. And so, you know, that term was not thrown out like it was on sale at Walmart, right? Like Blue Light Special. It was kind of reserved for people who actually held that type of a relationship with you. And so we do have instances where chants, in our traditions at least, were composed, and the way that they were held within our stories actually show that relationship. And then some of the, like in Hi'iaka's farewell, like you can tell that they were more than just friends. That Hi'iaka and Hopoi had a very intimate relationship in what they did and how close they were. When she talks about them surfing and making lays and visiting all of the fun times that they had traversing the landscape. It's kind of a long chant, but it's really good. And so yeah, so if that kind of answers the question. So there are references, but it's not like, and then we have like Hey that talk about the Paimahu. The Paimahu have also been immortalized in our constellations. So, you know, we have stuff like that where the Mahu is just kind of integrated into certain spaces without necessarily having to be like, oh, we're going to do like the Mahu set for Hula or something like that. Okay. Okay, tag Ryan real quick.
I think we need a Mahu set, right on. Okay, I know we're winding down. I just was looking at the other questions. Somebody's asking, what does this expression of the balance of masculine and feminine look like, you know, in terms of hula? And I think, like Manai said earlier, that is what we are seeking in all of our choreography, is to appropriately blend those particular energies. And, you know, to me, and again, however hula is happening in the world, to me is a beautiful thing. If people are dancing and celebrating and loving their aina and loving Hawaii, awesome. And the fact that hula is so diverse and there are many different forms of it, I think is a testament to its vitality. So we're certainly not here to say what hula should be, but you know, in our tradition, it's like the image of Pele, I think on some level resists some of the mainstream modern ideas of femininity and what that should look like. So some of our female awana looks kind of masculine, and our girls do some masculine movements with their foot because we're not necessarily concerned about conforming to a modern Western view of femininity. Not that we're not here to deconstruct that right now, but because we come from, again, a mythology, and not just a mythology, but a genealogy of a female akua with her own stick. So the female energy here is actually quite masculine. And I'll just say this, which is to cut a huge swath across, to cut across a huge swath of history, going back to what I was saying about hula and gender and how this has changed over time. You know, Haunani K. Trask writes a lot about how hula was used in conjunction with the image of the feminine to sort of, let's say, advertise and prostitute Hawaii and Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian landscape and people to a global audience. And hula was, you know, used as a tool in that. And so part of the idea of the feminine that gets tied up with hula from the world's perspective of hula is a very different one than the one that is grown out of this landscape. And that is not to down at all our Hapa Hula era and all of those hula that come from the hotels, and because a lot of our things got preserved by our willingness to shapeshift, and that's a very Mahu characteristic to me that hula has, that it can shapeshift, it can shift form to survive, and it can shift its gender, over time. And then we come to the Renaissance in the 1970s, where there was a big push to get the men back into hula and dancing, and there was cho, kane in hula, and people of many different gender expressions, and we see that reflected. But we still have some of the residue of course, because we're not in a vacuum here, but of mainstream Western American ideas of masculinity and femininity, and this idea that hula is a sissy thing or a feminine thing. Or if I'm a female, that I should dance hula in these ways because it fits into these particular schemas and models that we've received. And so one of the things I appreciate, again, coming from this aina of Pele, is that it is a little more androgynous, not only in terms of men and women and everything in between, however we identify ourselves dancing together, but that the choreography requires all of us to move our hips, and and also requires all of us to get a little grounded, as well as assertive, as well as fluid, So we're working with all these different elements. I mean, in that way, to me, it's very Mahu. It's very liminal. It's very non-gendered or plural gendered, right? Manai, anything else?
Okay, so, I think Ryan just covered the gender fluidity question that came in from Facebook. But to kind of tie on to that, for us anyway, the world according to us, it is about gender fluidity, or for us, we try to get that. And when you're trying to look for masculine or feminine, I mean, there's certain things, and it's definitely, for me, heavily influenced by the text that you're using. So if the text of the chant has a little bit more fluid, feminine tone, then that's kind of what I'm going to go for. If the text seems to be a little bit more masculine and aggressive, then that's what I'm going to go for, because you're trying to embody and emote the text through movement and through voice to humans, people that may not necessarily understand. Our environment understands exactly what's coming out of our mouths a lot better than, us trying to chant a translation in English. But I think it's more gender fluid or gender neutral in movement to try and push, because the images will change, and you could have an image in one line that's very feminine followed by an image that's very masculine. Or we have a genre of hula, mele ma'i. So mele ma'i are procreative dances, and it would probably be the most sensual, sexual, alluring looking ones. So the ones that make you go like, oh, like that, because they're very suggestive or sometimes outright straightforward and blatant, that that they're being sexual. Those tend to be, our mele ma'i are they're procreative dances, or ma'i are genitals, male or female. They're all both called ma'i. But so if it's written for so Kalakaua has a bunch. So if it's written for Kalakaua's ma'i, a lot of the images that they have in his mele ma'i chants are a lot more masculine, because it's talking about his sexual prowess. It's talking about how it works, because the function of the mele ma'i was for the continuance of your lineage. And a lot of times the mele ma'i was written Well, it could be written at various stages of your life, but a lot of times it would have been given to the baby when the baby is born, so that from the time that the child is a newborn till they become an adult and are procreating the world, that their ma'i has this energy that's going into it from this chant that's going to help it to, procreate. And then if it's a female, then a lot of the movement will be a little bit more feminine, unless she's a very masculine, aggressive ma'i, because we have some of those too. So, it'll kind of, that sort of determines whether it's going to look a little bit more fluid or a little bit more polarized, I guess, for me anyway. Okay, tag Ryan, because I think we're almost at time.
Yeah, I think we're almost at the end, so I'll just say something in conclusion, and then you can wrap us up. I guess in conclusion, I'll just come back to what I was saying earlier, which is that for me, hula has been so vital in helping me accept the wholeness of who I am. Growing up, local East Asian culture, going to a private school, everything was pretty status quo and normalized. I was not surrounded with a lot of queerness. Hula, slowly helped me to accept, and to not just accept, but to engage those parts of myself, actively in the service of the rest of our world and our landscape, and help me not through like deep political discourse, but just through celebrating. We're celebrating the environment, celebrating our bodies, celebrating the creative potential of our bodies, our minds, and of our community. All of that, if we're celebrating that, then we're not going to differentiate and cut off parts of our community. My experience of the hula pele has been of inclusion and of integration and of making a space for everybody. And that's what I love about our practice. And it has made a huge difference to me. And I think that's how it relates really to Pride and this month that we're having. And moreover, again, because hula is not happening in a vacuum, this also relates to what's going on in our larger world with our issues of racial injustice, because our issues of environmental justice, of gender and sexuality justice and racial justice are all tied. So this is my little plug for intersectionality. That hula makes a place for all of it and reminds us that everybody's spirit matters. And so all those lines that divide are, we really, in a ritual space, they're not useful. Yeah, and we bring everybody to the table. That doesn't mean that we misappropriate, or take anybody else's story on as only our own. And so I carry these stories carefully, because they're not mine. They've been gifted to me. So anyway, yeah, mahalo, and thanks for being open to hearing just our little perspective out of a huge world on something that I think is important today. Manai.
Okay. Yeah, and I kind of want to just say thanks for being and signing in, I guess, and wanting to listen to see what the hell me and Ryan have to say. I don't know. I wasn't sure if people was going to sign up. Yeah, who knows? But I think on the ending part, and I know for me that hula, because hula has been a part of my life since I was small, whether I was dancing or just being around it. And as far as it goes for me, hula allowed me to be okay with me, in being able to utilize as many facets as possible and as many experiences as possible that I had through all of these chants, through the mo'olelo, through a lot of the dances. I've in learning to dance hula and learning to chant, it really helped me to learn more about myself and be okay with it. Because, you know, I wasn't necessarily always okay with myself. But it kind of worked out. And, you know, I was sort of fortunate that in my family, gender wasn't necessarily an issue. Like, it really didn't matter. You could have been a purple alien with a horn and one eye, and they'd still invite you to the luau and be like, "Baby, you hungry? Come eat." But as far as, you know, trying to figure things out, it being able to move through the Pele and Hi'iaka story, not only through the story, but physically through the dance, orally through the chants, it really forcing myself to deal with particular emotions and parts of me and experiences that I was like, oh, hey, it's okay, it's okay. Life is good. Oh, this is why, you know. So it kind of helped me with that. And then I just want to thank Equality Hawaii, Mar and Ray for inviting myself and Ryan to come and share. And then thanks everybody for signing in from wherever you are.
All right, mahalo nui, Kumu Ryan and Kumu Manai for sharing so much wisdom and enlightenment about hula and gender and sexuality perspective. So I want to thank everyone for attending this event, the first of 7. Our events occur on Wednesdays and Fridays from 5 to 6. The next event is one where we focus on 2 people who are living on the Big Island who happen to be queer. So we're going to focus on their life and their journey. And one of them is the president of the Hawaii Island Pride. And I would like to introduce her to you, and she would like to say a few words and sort of promote some of her things. Let's see here. I'm trying to do several things at once, excuse me. So I want to introduce Beverly, and as soon as I can find her on our chat here, I will highlight her. And let's see here. Okay, it looks like it's not letting me highlight you, Beverly, but I'm going to unmute you. And if you'd like to say a few things, please go ahead.
Yeah, first off, thank you for holding this about hula. It was absolutely amazing. And thank you for answering all the questions. It was fabulous. So I'm the president of Hawaii Island LGBTQ Pride, and I just wanted to let everyone know that we are taking pre-orders for our t-shirts for Pride this year, and that can be found on our website, which you can also access through Facebook. I believe we have the link to our website up there. Join us tomorrow. We have Drag Queen Storytime starting at 10 a.m. and that will also be posted on our Facebook. And if you'd like to join us tomorrow, Pride is also going to be a part of the protest happening tomorrow downtown for the Black Lives Matters, and that'll be from 10 to 1 downtown Hilo over next to the soccer fields. And then also, as just so everyone knows, we are planning to do some really fabulous things on June 27th. So keep an eye out for the release of that. Mark your calendars, you know, for a big thing. Just, yes. And we appreciate working with you guys, and thank you so much. This was absolutely fantastic.
All right, thank you, Bev. So before we end this event, I would like to thank our board of directors of EqualityHi. I also would like to thank our co-sponsors for all 7 of our events, Full Life, Hawaii Artists, and a special shout out to the Hawaii Island Pride. So please join us next week, Wednesday, as we interview 2 unique people who are living on the Big Island. Other than that, leave your questions on the chat, and we'll send those questions to Kumu Ryan and Kumu Manai, and if they are able to answer it, they will. Otherwise, everyone have a beautiful evening. And everyone take care. Aloha.